Welcome to the Real CP Show. I'm your host, CP. And today's topic, Juneteenth, CRT, the contradiction, what other culture or cultures, etc. Again, today's topic, Juneteenth, CRT, the contradiction, what other culture, cultures, etc. Being Juneteenth holiday or the weekend for Juneteenth, I wanted to relay over a show and kind of relay over a couple of things on that this basically past Juneteenth weekend, should I say. And it was very interesting that millions of African ancestors, Native blacks, or maybe a little bit less than that, are celebrating or celebrate the Juneteenth weekend. And quite a number of ones that did not. You had however numbers of ones within the predominant culture, very few, however that goes, that was up there celebrated with some of the maybe American blacks as well. It wasn't going to be that many, but some of the ones out there who were doing it. And some of the other numbers of personnel from no Pacific cultures, backgrounds, ethnicity, immigration status, etc., that had no clue, and however numbers of ones still have no clue about Juneteenth. And I'm gonna get to that point. You say, what do you mean by quite a number of ones that really did not know? I'll get to that in 1 second. But it's just very interesting that the Juneteenth now being a national holiday within the U.S. and still there will be no reparations, there will be no laws, Pacific policies for the American blacks only. Not for personnel that are pretending to hide under black, but are not necessarily American black, but ones that are able to hide within the radar of blackness, but really don't care anything about American black. They know who they are out there. And so you have the thing going on with the CRT. And for quite the last several years, CRT has been a major debate within various types of cities and towns, and etc. People getting very emotionally hot behind what should not be even a hot base topic. But of course it is, because there are personnel within certain sections of predominant culture who cannot stand, because whenever they see upon the American black, they see it as a white mark, a terrible white mark upon numbers of their uh, great grandmother, great grandfather, well, excuse me, mother, father, grandfather, grandmother, great grandfather, great grandmother, etc., etc. They look at upon as a white mark upon numbers of their ancestry. And then the gang would pop up and say, well, I had nothing to do with, slaves. Right. And that's some white switchery tactics and things like that. A little white lie in that, because it's not about an individual person within sections of predominant culture. That is irrelevant. It is a collectiveness with few exceptions. And supremacy knows that, because supremacy is the most awesome mental manipulation force that has ever existed. They are the masters of manipulation and chaos. And so the thing about Juneteenth, it's a catch-22. It's like on 1 minute that by Texas being that progenitor of Juneteenth, yes, there is some major accolation that needs to never be forgotten. At the same time, and added context, it was not as if before it was a national holiday. It wasn't as if it was not already being recognized by quite a number of American blacks already. And then, however, different other cities and personnel within different other states that will also recognize it themselves. So for it to be a national holiday for quite a number of people are like, within the American blacks, however numbers are like, okay, I mean, it's nothing to jump up and down about. This has already been celebrated by quite a number of American blacks in the country already. But again, the power of supremacy, right? I will give you this national holiday, but I'm gonna make sure not to sit there and give you any type of true tangibleistic resources, right? For reparations as a collective. I'm not gonna give you any kind of resources as a collective, even though we as supremacy, right? We have given however billions of dollars, just utilizing modern times, billions of dollars over to Ukraine area, how much uncalculable number of resources we continue to keep giving so many other countries as reparations. At the same time, we continue to keep helping border breaker illegal immigration personnel with free resources. They break border immigration laws. We're going to sit there and help them be bused and planed throughout the different parts of the country for free. But that's not the topic of discussion today. But that is some type of demonic reparations in that part, right? It's not true reparations, but it's just resource reparations for non-citizens who are breaking border immigration laws. And then obviously, going into the anti-Asian law and uh, uh, we must help out alternative lifestyle category protections and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then it goes to the question of what other cultures have ever experienced anything similar to a Juneteenth. And the answer is beyond common sense. Nobody else within this country, no other cultures, ethnicities, certainly not alternative lifestyle categories that wouldn't even been thought of in the Civil War whatsoever. And that game is still being played upon millions of American blacks on that situation, on that. At the same time, border breaking legal immigration personnel certainly were not on plantations left and right. They wouldn't even be even a conversation piece, especially in the 1800s, right? When the Emancipation Proclamation and Juneteenth came in existence. Let alone you would have not had any significantalities of Asians on that situation. And that is a kind of switchery based word as well, because you didn't hear there's various types of Asian personnel, right? But people like the supremacy love to sit there and play switcheristic games and just say Asian. And most personnel don't ask which Asian you talking about, right? That have been just so much put upon hatred. Which ones you talking about? You talking about the ones that make up 0.2% of the population? Somebody makes 1% of the population. Numbers of Asian personnel that make up 10% of the excuse me, make up 3% of the population within a country. We say Asians. I'm just giving an example of something. Which percentage you talking about? But see, that's not going to overall be ever talked about, right? Because you got supremacists that want to keep maintaining this switcheristic type of mental switchery tactics. Just like if we say Hispanics, which Hispanics you talking about? Somebody say, well, they don't. Hispanic people sitting there getting hate put upon them. Which Hispanics? Right? Again, like which Asians? You got Afro-Asiatics, I mean Afro-Asian personnel. You have Afro-Hispanic personnel. So which one are you talking about? But see, that requires constructive analysis and bringing those kind of points up. And the question of beyond common sense is, again, since they are not talking about Afro Asians and they're not talking about Afro Hispanics, then what sections of Asians in the stereotype phenotype way, which type of Hispanic personnel in a phenotype way have had a Juneteenth in this country? Which alternative lifestyle categories of 20 alphabets were put on plantations left and right and broken up by families left and right? Do you see the nonsensical demonicnism of this game switchery that is continuously being allowed? And unfortunately, there are millions of African ancestry Native blacks that continue to keep allowing this to be happening. And now again with the CRT thing, right? You got personnel within the predominant based culture. Several ones. I'm not talking about that small percentage ones that just say, "Well, I just happen to be within the predominant based culture, but I'm not as if this collective." Okay, just as again, you have numbers of good Hispanic personnel, right? You have numbers of bad Hispanic personnel. You have numbers of good Asians. You have numbers of bad Asians, right? But again, supremacy goes off chaotic chaos and confusion, right? Because again, there are numbers of Asian personnel who can't stand other Asian personnel. There are numbers of Hispanics who can't stand other Hispanics. There are numbers of personnel within a term lifestyle category they can't stand other personnel within their term lifestyle category. But again, through switcheristic type of mental switchery tactics, right? Most of the time, personnel don't bring up that logical analysis. So the thing about again with the Juneteenth thing, you're talking about the heinousness of the numbers of African ancestors, Native blacks who were enslaved within its U.S. for generations. Remember, the Civil War was 1861 to 1865. So within those 4 years of heinous, inhuman, anti-black treatment, where's all these other different cultures at? Where is this alternative lifestyle categories at? Where is these other border breaking illegal immigration personnel? Obviously, 900% wasn't even a thought pattern, wasn't even inkling us in the eye on the radar of history within this country, right? Just like the Emancipation Proclamation, right? What group, what people, you can name whatever group you want to name. You can name whatever alternative lifestyle category you want to name. And show me where the Emancipation Proclamation has something to do with Hispanics, has something to do with Asians, has something to do with alternative lifestyle categories. Where did the Emancipation Proclamation have anything to do with alternative lifestyle categories? What did the Emancipation Proclamation have anything to do with border breaking illegal immigration personnel? What did the Emancipation Proclamation have anything to do with immigration status? What did Juneteenth have anything to do with those categories? Nothing. But again, right? Because it goes into the CRT thing about the contradiction. How can somebody talk about CRT? Well, we don't want CRT to be taught in our schools because it's going to basically make numbers of their kids within Panamanian culture feel what, guilty? Oh, we don't want this history of America to be taught as if it has a racist past. Contradictory 1.0. What are you talking about? Right? How can that make any sense? Because they know it doesn't. But sometimes, some numbers of personnel within Panamanian culture have a type of white guilt within themselves instead of being like, hey, you know what? Yeah, unfortunately, and yes, this thing's still going on right now, right? A racism within certain sections within the Panamanian culture, but instead of more numbers of personnel within the Panamanian culture saying, look, I just happen to be within the culture of predominant-based culture, but I don't act like that part, right? And they continue to keep doing what they're doing, but that's not the overall collective on that, right? But let me play you something. Let me play you something because again, it is some evil demonicness that this denial of racial racism that's still going on, and then still the deniability or the minimization, even in what talking about Juneteenth. You're talking about you cannot have a Juneteenth without having a civil war. Let me say it again. You cannot have a Juneteenth without having the inhumanness of anti-black treatment that was going on since enslavement, a civil war was based upon that you had personnel within the South, that Confederacy and other personnel that had segregation in their mindset did not want to let upon not numbers of Asians, not numbers of Hispanics, not numbers of border break illegal immigration personnel, not numbers of terms lifestyle categories, not didn't want to let that go, didn't want to let them go on a plantation, because of course it had nothing to do with them. Because it had things to do with the Confederacy and number of segregation personnel within various parts of the southern areas did not want to let the status quo of having millions of enslaved black folks be released from the bondage of free labor, right? They didn't want that to happen. And you had however numbers of personnel within certain parts of the northern saying, hey, we don't want that stuff coming up here either, right? So again, you cannot have a Juneteenth without having a civil war. So how can within the country not have a racist past or trying to minimize? Do you think this stuff can happen to another culture like American black and it be minimized? We know it doesn't. We know it won't ever happen like that. Let me play something for you.
Apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all. By doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country.
That is so beyond laughable, right? And not in a good way. It's beyond laughable, right? He said America's not a racist country. Well, again, very generically, at the same time, what that does is minimizing. Do you think that what we call natives are going to be told, hey, you know what? We don't want anything talking about no white man took the land, white man took our land, white man took our land. What white man? What white man is still oppressing what we call natives? And you hear all kind of different answers on that. Well, what? Because the ones who know I'm talking about, those natives who know I'm talking about, they're like, look, man, we are not going to sit there and give up these free resources. That ain't going to happen. Which is, again, it's a different type of switchery going on with that part. Right? But again, this is not the show for that. It's interesting, again, how the Emancipation Proclamation had nothing to do with natives. Right? But they get reparations. The Emancipation Proclamation, Juneteenth had nothing to do with natives, right? Because you're talking about the Juneteenth, right, happened in the 1860s. So in the 1860s, that would have been after the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears was around the 1820, 1830 time frame, right? And that was only for a few amount of natives that were being removed from one small section in the southeast parts of the country, right? And moved to certain parts in Oklahoma. The Trail of Tears had nothing to do with people being removed from natives being removed from northeast, upper northeast, right? Upper northwest, central, south. And he certainly wasn't about removing natives from the West Coast or anything like that. But how many are getting reparations, right? So again, there's all kind of switcheristic stuff going on. But again, what? America's not a racist country. But at the same time, who's getting reparations? Mm-hmm. Let's continue, right? And they was talking about 100-something years. Well, 2022 to, I'm just giving an example, present moment. 2022, 100-something years before would be what? 1922. Let's see something for a second. Uh, the colored signs was going on still after 1922. So mathematics is kind of off in that a little bit. Let me show that again. The color signs. Right? So it's just wow, right? You see the color signs, and you still talking about how many other cultures still didn't even exist in America with those color signs going on in this country last century. You got personnel that's first generation, second generation, weren't even around, right? When colored signs were still up about American blacks. But I don't want to go too much, going so many different areas. But again, Juneteenth, CRT, the contradiction, because it's just what it is. You got personnel that's going like demonicism, talking about CRT. Oh my goodness, CRT. Oh, we don't want the people talking about the country's racist. You cannot have that nonsense. How it's such a nonsense, right? Because it makes no logical sense. And quite no person within certain sections of Padang based culture are not going to use logic because it's based upon a white mark guilt on that, right? Because again, since CRT is still not even taught to youth in this country like that, not the way they try to play games with. And again, the minimization of the of Juneteenth. Because you got personnel, this is what none of the personnel within Padang based culture want to do about Juneteenth overall. Which means that quite a number of them want to just sweep things underneath the carpet. And then you got numbers of society was like, hey man, what about some of the personnel within Padang culture that are not like that? Okay, look, go jump into a lake of fire again. Okay, you had abolitionists, right? You had abolitionists, certain ones within the Padang culture. They also had our black folks too. You think this is some newfangled situations going on? This is not nothing new. Again, you had personnel within the Padang culture that was abolitionists, but that was not the collective. That was not the overallness of personnel within the Padang culture that wanted equality for blacks with numbers of personnel within the Padang culture. They did not want equality. You still had even numbers of abolitionists within the Padang culture that numbers of them did not want equality among them with numbers of black folks. They didn't like some of the ones didn't like the enslavement that black folks going through, but they still did not want the equality. So I want a personnel, all that nonsensical switch around game, that is not going to go. That's not going to fly with me on that. So again, let me play you something else too, because I'm trying to keep this show very short. And again, what other culture, had this portrayal?
Oh, I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. As I grind to Louisiana, my true love for to see. Oh, it rained so hard the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death. Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I've come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee.
Show me what numbers of Asian personnel that personnel within Padang culture had bands like that. Show me the Asian minstrel shows in comparison to black folks that came before. Show me where the minstrel shows for Chinese personnel, Asian personnel, whoever Asian you want to, just you can find names, even though most Asians didn't even exist in this country in the 1800s. Most didn't even exist in the country. The predominant base Asian was numbers of Chinese personnel, and that was such a insignificant numbers that start coming over here in the 1840s, which that's why you start hearing about the 49ers. So you start hearing about numbers of Asian personnel coming over here voluntarily, and they was going to California, right? Because that would be close more of Asian countries than from the eastern coast, right? Which then goes to Europe. So you're talking about that wouldn't even be in a conversation. Numbers of Asian personnel going, arriving on the opposite side on the eastern coast. That wouldn't even be in a conversation because logistics, it wouldn't be even a logical common sense at that time like that. And it certainly would have been a Spanish coming across to the Atlantic Ocean because of coming from where, right? And you better not say Spain. Because then you get your feelings hurt because that had nothing to do with that at all, right? So the thing about it is that, and there certainly was no alternative lifestyle categories going on in the Civil War times, let alone there was no such thing as a 20 different alphabetical categories going on. There was no such thing as that in the Civil War, let alone Juneteenth had nothing to do with no alphabetical categories. But again, millions of African ancestors, Native blacks, all lion personnel within certain parts of alternative lifestyle categories to attach themselves to black pain, and that's not a very logical allowability, right? And it is laughed at by certain ones within alternative lifestyle category, the ones who know they are. Right, knowing that they did not go through what black folks went through and still going through, right? I mean, it's a great game. So let me see. Go back to that initial video about America's not a racist country again. Oh well, it's like the thing where progress is made. Oh, progress is made. Numbers of, again, what we call Native Americans, ain't gonna hear all that. They don't hear that nonsense talking about, progress is made. We don't want to talk, we're not gonna talk anymore about the white man took our land, the white man took our land. They be like, forget y'all. We're gonna continue to get these resources. See, you see the game on that? But millions of African ancestors, Native blacks are told, forget about history. Do you see the discussionality that continues to be to succeed within this various parts of this society, right? That loves minimizing black pain. And again, in this society supremacy, the most awesome mental manipulation force that's ever existed, they will use and do use numbers of American blacks, sellout ones, to sit there and cause internal black pain that no other culture will allow a disproportionate amount of their people to sit there and go against their people. Do you see how crazy that wouldn't even happen like that? But that black pain is some of the most horrible, inhuman pain, internal pain that can happen to a people, because there is no continuous generational pain that any other culture, background, ethnicity, border breaking, illegal immigration personnel, immigration status, numbers of Hispanic groups or numbers of Asian groups. There's nobody compares on that. There's none. And the ones that know I'm talking about in those certain sections, they know that's the truth, right? And they make sure they don't want to hear that reality, right? Because they know already millions of African and Native blacks are not going to sit there and checkmate them when they start playing that little people of color nonsense. Or, what about blacks, and let's ask some indigenous people, let's ask some people of color. What are you talking about? What is a people of color? And I sit there and just showed you the colored signs. So people of color, but where was the people of color at and segregation that was still going on only a few generations ago in this country? Where are these people of color at that wasn't in this country? Where's the people of color at in the Civil War? Where's all these people of color at that didn't even exist in this country? Do you see the nonsensical demonic games that still have been allowed, right? But America's not a racist country. So you see the contradiction of the CRT nonsense, right? When you cannot have a CRT debate and say, wait a minute now, but without a civil war, you don't have a Juneteenth. Without a Juneteenth, then you cannot play debating games with CRT, right? No Juneteenth, no Civil War, and all the type of other inhumanness that was put upon American blacks prior to that and after Civil War, right? Going to World War One, still Spanish American War, or World War One and World War Two, and the Korean War, and still the Vietnam War, was still disproportionate amount of Vietnam veterans were blacks, or Vietnam active duty person at the time were still blacks, and disproportionately, right? Still higher numbers of them were going through racism. Higher numbers of Korean War active personnel at that time still would have been disproportionate numbers of black folks. World War II, there's no culture that had more active blacks, active cultures, things like that than American black, besides the predominant culture. And what was going on in World War II? Segregation. Segregation was still going on. Formal segregation that was still going on even after World War II. Okay, you still want to have if that one going on, you would have had no Rosa Parks. You would have had no Montgomery boycott. You would have had the Selma, Alabama, right? Inhuman treatment of the black folks, right? That was getting ran off by horses by personnel who was supposed to be protecting. That would have happened, right? But America's not a racist country. So you see the game, that's the disgusting game that's been allowed to continue to keep being played, right? And so in finishing up this show, I want to read something right quick about this Juneteenth scenario. I'm not going to go into all the details because that's been talked about numbers of times. But again, I wanted to sit there and do a show about the Juneteenth weekend scenario, right, as a timepiece purpose. Because watch again how still no reparations, no Pacific laws will be done for the American blacks. But I'm just going to read you something, just a piece about this article I was reading. It might be some other articles that had the same similar situation. But it said Juneteenth is a federal holiday, but it was talking about how in most states it's still not a day off, right? And so it talks about, I was going to just kind of paraphrase how it talks about 1 year later, basically after the Juneteenth was passed as a national holiday. It said about, around a little bit more than 24 states in general and District of Columbia have passed legislation or issued executive orders that would provide funding to let state employees observe the day as a paid state holiday, right? According to the Pew Research Center. They talked about how opponents of the bills that would create funding for the permanent holiday, that they have complained of the cost associated with giving workers another day off. How dare, right? But people can find billions of dollars, right, and legislate billions of dollars, right, to sit there and go over to Ukraine, right? And you got however numbers of Ukraine personnel that's going to different borders. Right? Billions of dollars going over to Ukraine to help numbers of Ukrainian personnel, right? And I'm not talking about the good numbers of Ukrainian personnel. I'm not talking about them. I'm not going to play this little silly game. I'm talking about billions of dollars going into Ukraine personnel who you like, wait a minute, where exactly is billions of dollars or billions of dollars mixed in with other resources to help whom out in Ukraine? When you got numbers of personnel that's trying to get away from Ukraine. So where's all these resources and money going to? But you got people that complain about, well, we don't know, trying to create this funding for a permanent holiday, so the person can get paid for this national holiday, for the personnel who would be eligible to get paid for the holiday. Well, we don't want to be able to, where can we find, trying to find that funding from, right? Do you see how that goes? on that. So he talks about how a certain state, a Republican said state employees should have the day off, and they set aside more than $690,000 in the annual budget to cover the overtime costs of any employee who worked on Juneteenth. But when the bill came up for discussion during a February committee hearing, this particular senator, a Republican, said that he had spoke with more than 100 constituents about the holiday. Only 2 knew what it was, he said, which again goes back to finishing up this show. Let me read something for a second. They talk about how for supporters, such arguments are painful to hear, especially as more Americans said they were familiar with Juneteenth. In June 2022, nearly 60% of Americans said they knew about the holiday. You said, well, 60%? Wow, that's a lot of people. Wait a minute now. But compared to 37%, only 37% basically, in May of 2021. So the overall amount of the people they polled, the overallness, which would have been over 60%, that they polled had no idea about Juneteenth, right? So the thing about it is that I just want to do a show on this because so many different excuses, right? That you got, how the person who know they are, they want to give excuses about another national holiday. We got MLK, which again goes back to the contradictory part by CRT, right? Because did not MLK had all kind of threats put upon him by another person within Padang-based culture? Why again? Was he sending a threat and all kind of people within Padang-based culture? Nope. He was nonviolent. Nope. He was nonviolent. Yep. Right? He just wanted to do some people will say he wanted to do, the holding hands for different, holding hands for different other cultures. Right? The holding hands, like I have a dream speech, right? Not be judged upon the color of somebody's skin. At the same time, what still happened to MLK? His life still was removed by a racial terrorist personnel. You see how that goes? But America's not a racist country. See, again, they like to do that broad base in America's racist country. Common sense will say there's ones within the country of America who know they are that have racist terrorism tendencies that have not changed in many generations. And they think because a new crop every generation comes up from the past generation that that's some kind of recognition of things have changed. But things continue to remain the same relating to the extreme racial racism against American blacks. Look at the statistics about who has the most hatred put upon them. It ain't Hispanics. Nope. It ain't Asians. Nope. It ain't because of someone's certain beliefs. Nope. The number one culture in this country of America that has the most hatred put upon them by statistics is anti-black. But at the same time,
100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all. By doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country.
Again, 100-something years ago was 1922. That would have been a generation and some change that had passed on 1920 to 1922, right? 2022, 100 years before. I'm just giving that present moment. I'm sitting there saying 2022, 100 years before would have been 1922. 2021, 100 years before that would have been 1921, right? The great Martin Luther King would have not even been born then. So here it is, after 1921, what, generation or so later, almost a couple of generations, well, about a generation or so later, right? Generation and some change later, after 1921, 1922, what was still going on? Again, what's happening? Racial, terroristic segregation going against American blacks. What was still going on again in the 60s, right? MLK was still going through what? You know what, right? Why he need again, his life was taken by a racist terrorism. But again, that was going on after 1921, after 1922. Do you see where I'm coming from? Again, what did I just relay over? Current statistics. We're talking about 21st century statistics. Again, but America's not a racist country. Hey, about America, you see how that generic terminology used? It is a personnel in various parts within the Panamanian culture, and how the ones that want to be honorary personnel within certain parts of Panamanian culture who have racial tendencies, right? That want to see black folks know their places, right? And have them look down upon the sidewalk when certain numbers of them pass by them. Numbers of men want to go back and have American blacks in enslavement, right? But again, you got personnel that are able to voluntarily come over here, skip lines like border breaking illegal immigration personnel that get free resources, be it legal, food assistance, WIC. They know what I'm talking about. They sit there, have that child, this child, that child, bam, automatic citizenship. Thanks again to Black Pain, right? For the 15 million of the Constitution that supposed to have granted, what's supposed to have been granted citizenship finally to American blacks, but again through dilution tactics, right? Through the 13, 14, 15 million Constitution, when again, most other cultures didn't even exist within this country. You see the diabolical demonism that goes on, but America is not a racist country. The country is not racist. It is known as a personnel within various parts of Panama-based culture, the ones who know they are, that make the racism within the country, right? And you got ones that want to be honorary from different other cultures and backgrounds, ethnicities, who want to be honorary person within the Panamanian culture, who numbers of them have secondary hatred for the black folks themselves. And you still got numbers of African ancestors, Native blacks talking about people of color, the ones who know what I'm talking about, that allow people to put them in that people of color box, right? So I want to say this last part. It is a very terrible thing that continues to keep happening to the American blacks. I'm not talking about the sellouts. I'm not talking about the ones that have cowardly tendencies to sit there and be scary of calling out racist tendencies. I'm not talking about the ones that'll sit there and sit there and do backstabbing behind other blacks because they want to be like and never will be like personnel within the Panamanian culture. I'm not talking about those ones that wake up every day or allowed to wake up every day and have this beautiful skin or have the beautiful skin of blackness, whatever shade it might be, but at the same time, they can't stand their pigmentation of different melanation factors, be it beautiful blue black, medium, beautiful, handsome black, dark black, high yellowness, super brown, finesse, white, high yellow Nello, whatever the brown skin of whatever the different shades of beautiful black. But you got people that have such hatred within certain parts of the American black that numbers of them wish they did not have any type of pigmentation they can just take off. while at the same time you still got numbers of personnel within certain sections of the Paname's culture that are going to tanning beds, that are going to the beaches trying to get themselves tan to get some pigmentation. You see how that goes? You see how that goes? So I hope this show was interesting show. I just kind of wanted to do a show about this Juneteenth and CRT, the contradiction, and what other culture. I thank you for tuning in to the Real CP show.